So it's a slightly dramatic video to get us going, but the idea was just to give you an idea that actually air traffic control and our digital in the skies, as we're here to talk about today, is actually often not what people expect it to be about. I've been with NATS nearly 2.5 years now, and in the role of chief architect. And actually one of the things that still surprises me now is the breadth of our operation. When people think about air traffic control, they normally think about towers like this because it's the first visual thing that people recognize. It's what you see at an airport. But actually, the tower is only a very small part of the air traffic control system. Centres like this, such as Swanwick, and we have two in the UK, Swanwick and Prestwick, is where the majority of air traffic control is actually done. These big centres, they look like giant secure warehouses in the middle of nowhere. Actually, this is where the skies are controlled, whether it is around the airports, into the upper airspace, out into the ocean, and they're some of the most large, complex computer systems in the world, and they are there for a number of things, which I'll get onto in a minute. To give you an idea of the scale, in the UK, NATS, the UK air traffic control provider, handles 3 key bits of airspace. The London flight information region itself, about with Scotland, about 1 million square kilometres of airspace. The London flight information region is some of the most complex airspace in the world, having a small number of airports clustered around London with many, many arrivals and departures simultaneously going on, and some of the most congested airspace in the world. That's some of the busiest airspace in the world. The Scottish FIR and also the oceanic airspace, at the top right-hand corner of the North Atlantic, that's some of the most busy oceanic airspace in the world. So there's a lot of airspace. As you can see there, accounts for about 25% of air traffic across Europe. A lot of data going on. So what I thought I'd do is really give you a bit of a background of what air traffic management is about and how we are really using digital technologies to improve what we do. And we're here to do 2 things. First of all, make sure aircraft stay safely separated. Fundamental reason that air traffic control was started is when you've got large objects moving very fast with lots of people on them, we need to make sure they are completely safely separated from each other. And again, the industry has moved on here now. We're now at the point where the safety is not even measured about how close they come, it's about actually how far apart they are in terms of actually maintaining large separacy boundaries around the aircraft to make sure that safety isn't impinged. One of the challenges you have is you can't just rely on what's happened, you actually need to predict the future, have foresight to understand where there may be risks to those aircraft. The other big challenge and one of the big roles of air traffic control, and it's probably one of the real focus areas that I'm going to talk to you about today, is the efficiency of that flow of traffic. Because when you have all of these planes flying in 3 dimensions, actually creating an efficient flow of information, efficient flow of traffic is really important. And here's the example that we normally use. Aircraft would ideally like to take off from an airport, a nice climb to their cruising altitude, a steady flight across the ground, and then arriving into the airport. Now, you'll know in practice that isn't what you normally experience. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I'll touch on a number of them. Traditionally, technology has been one of the constraints. One of the hardest parts of flying is navigation, knowing where you are. Traditionally, where you used ground-based radio beacons to find where you were going, actually meant that the route structures you were followed were based on where ground-based infrastructure was. On top of that as well, the role of air traffic control, we're having to make sure planes are safely separated, so we're having to tactically redirect traffic to make sure they do not come in conflict with any other aircraft. So if you look at our preferred route and the actual radar track, in practice, it's not as smooth as we would like it to be. And that's exactly one of our key focuses is how do we make this the most efficient journey as possible whilst maintaining that safe separation. So how are we doing that? Well, first of all, traditionally, our airspace was based on a route structure, much like a motorway network. We created routes in the skies that people would follow, create in effect these road signs, these navigational aids that you would follow, and then as air traffic controllers, we'd break that up into sectors, bits of roadway, if you will, and put our air traffic controllers carefully managing their bit of road. And what you end up with is this sector layout, as we've broken the airspace into sectors, and each air traffic controller has a sector or a number of sectors that he's keeping an eye on and making sure that those aircraft stay safely separated. And here's an example. Here's a flight coming out of Europe, probably heading off to the US, and an incoming flight from the Nordics heading to Dublin. As you can see, they have to identify conflicts within their sector and route around them. And again, back to our previous slide, this is where some of those inconsistencies occur. Now that itself is a job that is really hard, it's really difficult, these things are moving very fast, you've got to have this 3D picture in your head, and we use tools such as radar and those capabilities to identify where those are, and then the controllers make these tactical changes to height maybe, to climb them or lower them, or change the heading to ensure that they are safely separated. The future, though, is actually to remove that tactical intervention. So if we take that same flight path, if actually we made a slight tweak to the flight path a lot earlier on, that flight path could be a much more smooth, much more direct, much more efficient flight path, and deconflict the path of that other aircraft long before it ever came into pass. This is what we call four-dimensional trajectories. Traditionally, we've relied on what we would call two-dimensional trajectories, flight data saying you need to be here at this point in time, and this is the route you're going to follow. Actually, with the advance we have in digital capability, we are now able to predict much more granular trajectories over time and have a high-resolution expected flight path and actually update it as we go. So rather than looking at what has happened, is we can use the surveillance data, the data about what the plane has done, to improve our prediction of where it's going. So by predicting where it's going, we can identify any conflicts long before it happens and give the aircraft much smoother trajectories on their way. So rather than these tactical interventions, we can make it a much more planned, much more smooth, and the benefits to the customers are huge. One of the things this enables is what we call free route airspace as well. So I talked earlier on about our route network in the skies, much like roads. Again, one of the things that we have to be really cognizant of is what things we've done for legacy reasons and where the technology has now enabled us to move away from that. So for example, that route-based network, those ground-based navigational aids, with GPS and enhanced navigational systems, actually the planes know where they are. They don't need to rely on that ground-based infrastructure as much. And with the advanced planning tools we can now create, we don't have to use the route network to identify where we know we're going to get congestion. So actually what we can do is start to enable what's called free routing, where flights can actually pick the route they want to go, unconstrained by that route map, unconstrained by the ground-based infrastructure, and fly where they want to. Again, this is dramatic improvements for the airlines because they will burn less fuel, they get to where they need to be quicker, more reliably, and burning less fuel, that's less CO2 emissions, that's a much better outcome for all. So the benefits of this 4D trajectory, this forward-looking view of where flights are going, and also enabling what that enables in terms of free route, actually from a controlling perspective makes it much more interactive, it's much more forward-looking, it's much more smooth and efficient, and it brings increased efficiency and reduced emissions for the aircraft themselves. So this technology is starting to be rolled out at the moment, again, enabled by the future the capabilities that exist in infrastructure. The systems that we have today were constrained by the technology they operated on. Frankly, when you're handling 6,000, 7,000 flights a day in real time over your systems, you need some of the smartest kit in the world. Actually, as the computing capability has moved on, we're able to do a lot more with what we have and grow that capability to realize these things. And again, how we actually do these things is changing as well. So traditionally, we've used radar to understand where the planes are. Radar's fantastic bit of kit, British invention, very large objects, very expensive things, and that brings us some challenges. So A, they are ground-based infrastructure. Again, we have to deploy them around the country. The world we're living in is changing as well. So 1.5 trillion data items a year, roughly what we get from our network of around 23 primary en route radars. So 1.5 trillion data items per year, we have to use that data to make decisions on the fly. One of the things that doesn't help us, things like wind farms. So wind farms appear to our radars as awfully like aeroplanes because they have foils on them. So one of the things that we're having to do is actually mitigate and infill radar around these wind farms so actually we don't get confused between wind farms and aircraft themselves, because what it actually does is create a little sparkle on the screen for the air traffic controllers, and it's both distracting and masks air traffic. The other big problem with radars is they have to be in very difficult areas to get to. Our radars need to be able to see the skies, so we put them on the top of hills, and there's about 23 of these in some of the most inhospitable parts of the country. When you've got 4 tons of metal spinning at 2 RPM on the top of a hill, when it does go wrong, you need to be able to get up there and fix it. We have triplicated coverage around the screen, around the country, but at that kind of height, sometimes those are very difficult things to get to. So one of the things we're starting to do now is to exploit new digital technology to actually augment our radar capability and fuse data together to get a better idea of where the planes are. One of the earliest examples of that is satellite-based surveillance. So today our surveillance is done by radars. The majority of planes now carry transponders that are in effect telling us where they are. Some of you may have used apps like Flight Radar where actually you can see where planes are. That's mostly ground-based infrastructure collecting that data. What we're doing now is moving to a satellite-based model where actually there's a blanket of satellites around the world that are picking up this data and allowing us to report where those planes are. This allows us to get a much better view of where the planes are, particularly in areas where radars can't reach. Over the ocean, for example, you'll be aware of some of the incidents that have happened around the world. With this kind of technology, we'll be able to get a much clearer view of where planes are at all the time and fuse that data together to, again, improve our capability. So if I bring this back to our earlier point around free route, actually, if we can get an idea of where a plane is and how it's performing well out into its journey, we can start to plan and deconflict how that plane's going to interact in our airspace when it may be 4, 5, 6 hours away in somebody else's airspace. So again, we are able to use predictive technologies to get a much better view of what's going to happen in the future. An example of how we actually then use this, and this is, again, in practice now, those of you that have flown will often, particularly if you're flying into a very busy airport, may have got stuck in a hold where you're going round and round in circles, and it can be pretty exasperating. Now, that's for 2 reasons. The primary reason is we don't have the infrastructure on the ground in many places in the world. Runways are actually the bit that constrain often the air traffic network, and we have to hold aircraft waiting to land. The other thing is where you have these airports running at particularly high levels, we actually need that pressure on the runway as well to make sure that we don't have any gaps and we can actually land planes on time. Now, traditionally, what that means is everybody comes along, and particularly places like Heathrow, where we actually have 4 inner holds, you sit there holding, and we call the planes off in order and land them. But that is not great for the customers, but also it's burning a lot of fuel. Again, that's increasing the emissions, and it's wasting everybody's time. So what we've developed is a system for slowing those aircraft down en route. So traditionally, planes would fly in. As they reached our airspace, we would take them to a hold, they would circle around for a while, and then we'd bring them into land. What we've started doing is sharing information with our partners way out into the network in real time to actually explain what's going on, so we can slow those aircraft down en route. So actually, where we abut airspace, and going back to the previous slide, particularly in places like France and Belgium, actually what we're doing is sharing this delay data and this sequencing data with our partners so they slow the planes down before they get to our airspace. What that means is it either reduces holding or actually even removes holding, because it's better to have a plane that arrives slightly slower but goes straight into land than burn the fuel going round and round in circles. So again, by sharing information with our partners and increasing the level of collaboration of the data we hold, actually we can improve the customer's experience, and we can also improve the performance and the efficiency of the environment we're operating in. Again, reducing those CO2 emissions. Again, the technology here, this is all about information sharing, standards-based information sharing. Building on that is one of our other big problems. And some of you, again, may have experienced this. One of the things we have to do when aircraft are coming into land is make sure that they're safely separated apart, because they create not only do they create congestion on the runway, but they create what's called a wake vortex behind them. So they create a spiral of wind that introduces significant turbulence. So we have to keep those planes apart, and depending on how big the planes are, we have to keep a bigger distance between them. So on a day where there's relatively light wind, we'll be landing about 40 to 45 aircraft an hour at a major airport such as Heathrow. The issue we have with this, though, is strong winds. Because if we take a day where actually the wind is stronger, as the planes come into land, they're actually flying slower, their ground speed is lower because they're having to fight against the wind. What this actually means is because we had to keep them apart by 3 miles, or depending on the weight of the aircraft, up to 6 miles, because we have to keep them far apart, the landing rate reduces. So on a very windy day at somewhere like Heathrow, our landing rate can be reduced to 32 to maybe 38 landings per hour. That has a massive impact on the customers, has a massive impact on the airports, and it's all down to weather. So how do we solve this? So one of the things we've done is, again, used massive amount of data to improve the situation. So we know these wake vortexes are really important. So we deployed with our partners some really clever technology that actually could look out into the sky and measure the vortex of the aircraft coming off. And actually one of the things we gained an understanding of very quickly is the amount of wind actually has an impact on how quickly those vortexes disappear. So on a windy day, that turbulence that's created by the aircraft dissipates much more quickly. As I touched on in the previous slide, the size of the aircraft has a big impact in terms of the how far apart we have to leave them, because the bigger the aircraft, the bigger the turbulence. So the smaller aircraft, suffer the turbulence more, but also create less turbulence themselves. So the data which we hold in which order the aircraft needs to come in is particularly important to getting this right. We also need to know what's going on. So actually we need to know what the wind is going on. So we take live data from the aircraft as they're coming into land. So each aircraft is transmitting a data burst every few seconds. We gather that data in real time and compare what the actual wind is right now out in the skies, our reference data, this big pool of millions and millions of flights in terms of how quickly wake vortex dissipates, and the type of aircraft. And we fuse all of that information together into a system we call TBS, Time-Based Separation. And what this allows us to do is give the tools to controllers to allow them to make decisions in real time to reduce the separation. So because they're normally maybe 3, 4, 5 miles apart, actually, because the time is now longer, because they're moving slower, we can bring them closer together because they don't stand any greater risk of coming closer to each other. So we can move to a model we call time-based separation, where actually we reduce the separation distance from the aircraft over the ground, but they're actually still separated by the same amount of time. So safety is still maintained and is paramount at all times. But actually we can increase the landing rate again from between 36 to 40 landings per hour. So we can make ourselves more resilient to the weather. We can respond to the world that we're living in around us and reduce the impact on the airport, on the customers, by using all of this data. Again, this is fusing a huge amount of things. Why is this possible now? This went live at Heathrow earlier on this year. Why is this possible now? Well, it's possible because we can process the data more quicker than we ever could. We can also gather the data in real time off these airframes and actually make those decisions in real time. So the benefits that we're taking from the digital technology, and again we're seeing many other organizations access, is actually by fusing together what we call big data, which is high velocity data, data moving at great speed and very rapid, with big sets of reference data, we can make decisions in real time that improve the experience for our customers and the flying public. And again, from an airport perspective, being able to be more resilient to the weather is a really important part of the service we offer. Quite a complex scenario, but this is, again, in practice, what we are now delivering for our customers. So, to give you an idea, and just to conclude on some of the things we've been talking about, how are we using digital in the skies? So we're really exploiting the massive improvements in computational power. We're predicting the future in those 4 dimensions. We're exploiting that digital techniques that we've never had before, and the capacity we've never had before, to actually create a much more efficient flight profile planned in advance. We call it from hindsight to foresight. Not looking at what has happened and reacting based on what has happened, but actually predicting the future, having foresight into where the flights are going, and creating a much more efficient environment. We're also exploiting these new data sources, touched on with TBS, so gathering as much data as possible, be it from satellites, from radars, fusing all of this data together and getting a better view of what's going on out there. If you can have a really good idea of what's going on, you can then change your plan of what you're going to do. Again, this is how we do it in our industry, but other industries can exploit exactly the same capability. There is so much data out there. By bringing all this data together and fuse it, you can make much more valuable decisions about the future. And we're also sharing information in real time to increase this network efficiency. So we're using that information, sharing it with other people such as other air traffic organizations or the airports themselves, and sharing information around the overall system and everybody that's involved in it to improve the service, be if that's reduced holding as you're coming into an airport, or actually, again, we share information with the airports so we know when planes are going to be late coming off blocks, or actually when telling the airports when they're going to be late arriving. And also exploiting all of this data to access, and accessing this real-time data to improve things like weather resilience. So we are getting over Mother Nature by using digital information, by using this data, using this computational power to actually change the way we work depending on what they do. So if you would like more info, we've got lots more videos, and we've got lots more information on our website, nats.aero. I'll be around for a little while as well if anybody has any questions, and participate in the next panel. Thank you.